Friant Water Users next.
Good afternoon again. Steve Automuller with Friant Water Users Authority, Friant Water Authority. And I thought Babel Water District always did a really good job with their conservation. I just want to speak to this whole issue of the reduced reliance on the Delta. I'm not going to get into arguments, but I will just say we agree strongly with the position of the water districts that that is a fundamental misinterpretation of that element of the Act. We do not believe it was intended to say reduce the reliance that you already had on the Delta for your existing water supplies. And what you've done by pulling that interpretation into this language is you create a situation, and I agree that I don't like to see regulations described by examples, but let me just give you the example of the Friant Water Authority. The member agencies rely both on exports as a result of an exchange and water from the watershed. That's their water supply. It is a supplemental water supply. They primarily rely on their groundwater, and it is overdrafted. We recently entered into a settlement that involves releasing some of our water that we had been using for 50 years, approximately 20% of it. And I suppose technically that is a reduction in reliance on the Delta. But just looking at the districts and their need, part of that settlement, which is approved by a federal court and is subject to agreement by the state and federal agencies, says that the Bureau is supposed to do a plan to recapture and recirculate that water. They're still working on that, but presumably that involves some of that water reaching the Delta and being recaptured in the Delta and returned to the Friant districts. If you go through this list of items, did they reduce their reliance on the Delta directly? No. They still rely on that 800,000 acre feet that has to go to the exchange contractors. That can't change. Their water requirements are 3 times that. Has that failure resulted in the need for the project? Well, I suppose you could say if they hadn't, or if they could figure out a way to reduce it, they wouldn't need to recapture the water. But it really isn't a failure on their part. It's the result of a judgment. And so now they've got to recapture this water, and some could interpret this to say, I don't believe that it would necessarily, but some could interpret this to say that it would be inconsistent with the Delta plan for that water to be recaptured in the Delta, because it might be considered a new export even though it's part of the operation. So need to consider carefully the types of problems that can get created by this interpretation of the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.